All right, welcome back to another episode of Data Disruptors. And today we have here with us Greg Ruhnow. And Greg is an architect at FactSet, principal architect at FactSet. So, Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, well, we have a lot to discuss and a lot to unpack here. And I think a good place to start would be probably to educate our listeners a little bit about the company FactSet. And so I'm not personally a financial professional, but I do read the Wall Street Journal, and very frequently I see kind of the name FactSet underneath various charts and graphs. And so I know that's a small portion of what FactSet actually does. So maybe walk us through a little bit more about the company and maybe its history a little bit.
Yeah. So I personally have been at FactSet for 15 years, but FactSet has been around since the late 70s, so much longer than me in my tenure here. But we're a financial information services company, right? And so that's oftentimes why you're seeing our name associated with like a graph or some data points or whatever. We probably provided the data. Um, and so maybe we'll get into it a little bit later, but we kind of provide a whole range of products that kind of offer different access points depending on what users need. Um,
And
yeah.
and you, I think earlier you told me that the company's been around for something like 40 years and started off with somebody riding a bike and delivering
Yeah.
data to people's doorsteps quite literally.
That's how we got the original name. The original FactSet was referred to a printed piece of paper that we operated in the Wall Street area in New York, and we'd print those out. Somebody would call up and ask for like, hey, I need the FactSet on FactSet on FactSet would be but maybe like GE or whatever at the time. We'd print it out and give it to a courier, and they would bike it over to them. Pretty quickly. FactSet has been advanced for a while. I think. We weren't doing web-based delivery, but we kind of were. We had an installed application, but that installed application would actually very early on it connected back to our servers, and that the servers really controlled all aspects of it. So even before the web was nowadays the web is very mature, and that's the model that folks use. But even in the early 90s, we kind of had that type of architecture. When browsers were still kind of developing.
Cool. That's I always love kind of understanding where things started.
Yeah.
So when you look at kind of data, obviously that's being a data company. Data is at the heart of everything you do. So walk us through a little bit about kind of what data you deal with, where does it come from, how are you acquiring it, and things like
Yeah.
that.
So as you mentioned, I probably should have mentioned this more in the intro, right? Like it's all about connecting users with data, and there's a lot of different channels that takes, but data is the core of our business, right? There's in terms of quantity, there's 75 data sets that we collect in house, meaning it's some sort of unstructured source that we collect it, we curate it, et cetera, and deliver those. And on top of that, there's over 1,200 independent data providers that we partner with. That can give us any number of data sets from one of those providers. Some of them maybe just give us one data set. Maybe some of especially like in the benchmarks area, maybe give us like hundreds of data sets, hundreds of feeds that we have to ingest from a single vendor. So the breadth of the data that we deal with at FactSet is quite wide, right? So it's a lot of different vendors, and so the value that we really bring and add to this ecosystem is. It's not trivial to onboard data, and it's not trivial to onboard a lot of data. And so we onboard the data, we make sense of the data, we try to connect it so that it can be used together. And in that way, instead of somebody going out and collecting it themselves and taking on that burden, they come to us and we just kind of give them we don't actually really use the medallion architecture within FactSet, but really that's what it is when we ingest it, it might be more that bronze, a little bit more raw, and then what we end up delivering to our clients is kind of at the gold layer.
So some of these data sets are, very structured feeds. You're getting, maybe ticker data, things like that, and others maybe more unstructured, scrapings of websites and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, even things like regulatory filings, where there is regulations around the type of information that the company needs to report, but oftentimes it takes the form of a PDF. right? And so, for those who have gotten under the covers of PDF, I haven't gotten super deep, into it, but I understand that the structure can be completely random. Just because something shows up here on the screen doesn't mean that it's associated with those other things that are around it. When it gets rendered in terms of physically in the file where that stuff is documented, and so it can be quite challenging to do the OCR. And obviously, there's a high degree of accuracy that's needed, right? With people are basing financial decisions off of our data, right? And auditing is also a big thing. So if we pull a number out of one of those reports, we basically need to be able to, when we put that name number in front of somebody, one of the capabilities we have is they can say, hey, like, where did this number come from? We can actually walk it back to the PDF that it was pulled out of. Which I think is I think it's whenever I don't actually do that very often, but whenever I do, I'm like, this is really cool.
So I imagine some of the challenges relate to just the fact that you're getting data from different sources, and maybe having to make things consistent. NVIDIA spelled one way somewhere in some source, and a different way in a different source, and obviously that's a simple example.
Yeah, 100%. Concordance is we kind of refer to that as concordance internally, but or entity management. It's we put a lot of effort into that in terms of if it's NVIDIA over here, NVIDIA over here, no NVIDIA, depending on how it's spelled and how it's presented. Maybe one feed gives us like an email address for the company. Maybe one gives us a name. Maybe one gives us their headquarters. How can we actually identify that they're all talking about the same entity so that we can actually get all that data, connected to that entity, and you can draw, insights from all those different sources. So yeah, we do that within our data sets. We even, sell that as a service as well, where people can kind of, be like, hey, here's the information I have. Can you help me make sense of this and figure out what the entities are?
So when you're serving this data to your clients, different financial professionals, in what form factor are you serving it? Are you giving them the actual data, or are you giving them dashboards that show different things about the data? How
Yeah.
are you doing that?
The metaphor I really like for FactSet, and honestly, even when I was doing like the intro of the company, this is already in my head. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna probably talk about this later, but I like to think of it in terms of Legos. And so, really, I think of the data that we ingest, whether it's from unstructured source or delivered to us from one of our partners, as kind of being almost like the raw. I don't actually know how plastics are made, but like the raw oil, right? So before it even becomes a plastic, we kind of get that raw ingredient, and we refine it down into, like, if you're going to make a yellow brick, there's kind of like a yellow plastic before it goes into the mold, and so like that's our data and kind of at our lowest level. And so some people just want to buy that. So like I said, we kind of refine it. We get to that gold layer for the medallion architecture, and some people will buy that. So they might get that shared to them via Snowflake. We also have the ability to push it into AWS, to Azure, GCP. We have the ability to deliver on Databricks. We also have more legacy systems. We're pushing CSV files to FTP sites. So we might just give them our raw data, right? We don't give it till we sell them the raw data. From there, it's you take the raw data, you take the plastic that you've kind of refined, and you actually mold it into bricks, right? And so I kind of think of that as like our API layer, kind of like a step above the access to the raw data. We might use it through APIs, and on top of that, now you kind of have like components, right? And so you might have like we refer to this as white labeling. So you might have like a UI widget. And so a lot of times in these financial institutions, they'll have their own dashboard, right? And their employees will log into a dashboard in the morning. That's kind of what they do their work out of. FactSet also has a workstation that I'll get to in a minute, but sometimes they don't want to buy the whole FactSet experience. They don't want the whole kit that has all the opinions. They're like, hey, we like our dashboard. We just are missing X capability. And so they'll come in and they'll plug in a piece of FactSet functionality, like a white label piece of FactSet functionality that'll just show up alongside all the things that they built in-house. And then, it's kind of, I was alluding to, we have the fully featured workstation application. So there's, historically there's been an installed workstation. We have a pure web experience for the workstation. We also have mobile experiences as well. So that's, and the version of the workstation you get depends on the type of user you are, if that makes sense. So, but it's basically we are structured in SBUs to basically really understand the users that are using the workstation, what their needs are, and then kind of tailor workflows around them with the workstation. So quite
quite the operation,
Yes.
to get all these different products and feeds and different form factors of data delivered um, to your clients. And maybe one day we'll do an episode about how oil turns into Legos. That's going to be another half hour at least. But
Probably much longer, but yeah,
probably
let's see
much
what we can
longer.
distill.
Yeah. So, I was thinking about like, how 44 years ago, it was somebody riding a bike and delivering, pieces of paper to folks. And, today you have this very modern, lake house architecture, using Iceberg and so forth. But what has that evolution been? You must have gone through like different iterations and architectures along the way.
Yeah, it's any company that is just at FactSet, and I think any company that didn't just start is really like a sum of all the decisions and all the technologies that got it to that point. And I think that's a challenge, not just working in data. I just think in general it's easy, but especially in data, especially recently, right? It's very easy to kind of look at the capabilities that the data industry has been coming up with, over the last 5-10 years, or even more recently, and be like, man, like why can't we have that? Why can't we have that in house? And so you kind of have to remember what you do have today is what got you here, right? And so there's always this balance you have to strike. And the metaphor that gets tossed around a lot is you kind of have to change the wheels on the bus while it's going 70 down the freeway, because your operations don't stop because Iceberg is now mature enough and you want to adopt it, right? And so it's how do you fit it into the organization? And so there ends up being a bit of a tail, right? In terms of we don't have any couriers. At least I don't think we have any couriers. Maybe someone listens to this and corrects me, but we don't have any couriers anymore. But also not everything is modern, right? There's a whole gamut, and it changes also because FactSet has grown organically, and we've done things ourselves. We've also acquired companies, right? And they bring their own history into the organization. So it's an evolution over time, and I think what's interesting also is not all debt is technical, right? With the FactSet being around for so long, starting in the late 70s like we did, it's not like we could go and grab like a really mature like database system like Postgres and be like, oh yeah, we're gonna even at that time before kind of there's the cloud of and say like, hey, we're going to use this, right? We built things ourselves. We have our own. I don't necessarily call them table formats, but that's probably an okay enough metaphor. And the way that those worked is we kind of take all of our data and have to project it in 2 or 3 dimensions, because that's kind of how those systems were architected. And the technical challenge aside, that kind of warps how people even think about the data. They're used to thinking about 2-3 dimensions, and you start collecting data sets that are 4, 5, 6, 10 plus dimensions. It's like how do we do it?
Yeah.
How do we display this to the user, right? Because that's part of our workstation application is anticipating how the users want to use the data, right? And giving it to them. I think for those used to building like dashboards, that's kind of what our workstation is. A little bit is like what dashboards can we build that our clients are going to find useful on top of the data. So it's the navigating the changing tech is hard, but navigating change with people is can be just as hard, if not honestly harder sometimes.
Yeah. No, that's something I see it very, very frequently at many companies. Is the hard part is often the human part, the organizational challenges. It's sometimes harder than getting a new platform in or a new system in and things like that.
I think your actual question though was kind of like the evolution of the architecture. So to actually try to put a bow on that. Given how much data and the data ecosystem has been changing, especially recently, capabilities that FactSet used to have that were really differentiating are maybe not so differentiating anymore. Like they're getting figured out kind of more generally, right? There's all kinds of really great solutions for MPP and vector compute and all that stuff. So I think as an organization, it's become critical to us to understand where are we adding value, and where does it make sense to just kind of use what the industry has given us. And so that's kind of how we're navigating that. We look at a decision and say, hey, if we invest here, if we put engineering effort here, is this going to actually differentiate us, or is this actually just going to copy something that maybe already exists? And like, yeah, it'd probably maybe be a little bit better because it's more bespoke and special to our use case, but like, there's opportunity cost to that. And so I think that's really how I try to approach these decisions is is it going to give us an advantage in the marketplace? And if it's not, let's get it from open source or buy it if we can.
Mm-hmm. So talking about open source, you've been public about the fact that you've adopted Iceberg, and also that you're using Dremio to query some of that data. Can you talk about why you chose Iceberg? What was the process or the reason for doing that, and what role it's playing in the organization?
Yeah, and it's interesting because now in September of 2024, Iceberg is a pretty obvious pick. But we didn't pick it in September 2024. We actually picked it like
Yeah.
3 years ago, and I think it was much less obvious at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And but data being kind of at the core of our business, when you look at something like Databricks at the time and Snowflake also, obviously both have started to open up more recently, kind of because of the success of Iceberg, but they weren't at the time. The thought of being locked into an ecosystem and the data is our business. If we put all of our data there and then they decide to send the price through the roof, that's a really scary proposition, right? And so being able to be on Iceberg and say, hey, I want to move to somewhere else, it was kind of really appealing. And now with the advent of things like Polaris, and I don't know if we'll talk about catalogs later, but kind of moving towards kind of this open catalog standard, and we have clients that we need to deliver to GCP, AWS, Databricks, Snowflake. Like they're using these systems, and really we want to be able to deliver wherever they are, right? And so with Iceberg now looking like a really good choice, and kind of now moving on to the catalogs ecosystems with things like Polaris, and we'll see how that all shakes out. But the promise, I think, of something like Polaris is really high, because it's just like, hey, let's put all our data there, and then we can use it wherever we need to.
Yeah. And how do you get the data into these tables, these Iceberg tables in your lake?
That's a great question. Kind of calling back to the fact that we work with thousands of vendors and we collect our own data sets.
Yeah.
The way that data kind of flows at FactSet is it's a very distributed operation, right? It's, a central team's not going to manage that level of data flow. And so what we do have central is kind of like a platform, right? So we have like a platform that provide guide rails for people onboarding all this data. And so the team will come and they'll kind of collect it. They'll do the Jupyter notebooks, and we have a pretty strong kind of logical modeling layer at this point that is it's getting better every day. So they come in, they kind of logically model the data, and then when they ingest in the notebook, they kind of ingest it according to that model. And from that point on, it's kind of all of the physical storage is actually handled by the platform, right? And so there was a point at some point in our past where we were purely on Postgres, and then we're like, you know what, this doesn't make sense for us. It's really expensive, relatively speaking. And then we were able to switch that over to Iceberg in a relatively short amount of time, right? And so that's the advantage of having kind of like that centralized architecture, is that as a platform team, we can kind of make that decision without having to go deal with updating 1,200 pipelines.
Yeah. So the platform team, the centralized team, owns the platform, and these various technologies in the lake. But then each of the different teams owns a different data set. Is that how it works?
Yeah, or a collection, or like
Yeah.
it's yeah. Yep.
And so they're responsible for acquiring that data set, understanding what it's supposed to be, making sure the quality is right. There's no errors there, cleaning it up. Those kinds of things.
Exactly. And what we're trying to do, we've always had some elements of this, but I think what we're trying to do, lean into even more at FactSet, is this idea of kind of like domain and domain ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of just like, hey, if we've got 20 feeds that are all talking about, one of the things that we've been doing more at FactSet is like deep sector. So if we've got like some amount of feeds that are talking about cell towers, well, it doesn't make it doesn't make sense for that to be spread across like 5 different teams, right? Like let's get somebody who really is going to specialize in understanding what it means to collect cell towers and kind of get them owning that domain.
Do they own the security, kind of managing who's allowed to see that data too?
That's also kind of handled it's a part of the platform, right? So they will have to kind of set up the rules, right? They'll have to understand, hey, this data is coming from this vendor and it's kind of like under these obligations. And so they'll when they collect the data, they'll have to say like, here's the rules for who's allowed to access these columns. We have, column based, we have table based, column based, row based. We kind of have all the different access paradigms. And so they have to basically, put that in the metadata to say like, here's who's allowed to access this. And then, enforcement is done by the platform.
Interesting. It's a very hot topic these days. The whole idea of kind of how do you balance the centralization versus decentralization, right? What are because everybody wants to kind of delegate as much as possible to the business teams that understand the data and are responsible for the data, but at the same time, you want to ensure that you have the right security and governance, and that company doesn't get into trouble, and also that you have some consistency between things, right? A lot of people need to query data from multiple parts of the business or multiple different feeds.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that what I just described, right, is centralized but distributed. But what we're still working kind of centralizing. Even if you do lean into that domain model, how do you make sure that kind of cross domain you have alignment, right? So that's kind of like another problem that we're working on. If somebody is talking about what's a good example? If somebody's talking about a power plant, I think power plant is really interesting. Like, how do we agree on like what does it mean to be a power plant? Are solar panels on someone's roof a power plant? Is a wind turbine a power plant? What does that actually mean? And kind of align, having that like conceptual alignment kind of helps corral the whole distributed ecosystem, if that makes sense. So.
And is that something that you have, kind of systems around and technology that helps with that? Or is that more of a kind of a people kind of process, documentation approach?
Yeah. It's, I think there's a really interesting stat, and I'm probably going to get this slightly off, but I think I'll be in the ballpark. By volume, 40% of FactSet's data has been collected over the last several years. So, historically, we've been a very, kind of like people-oriented organization where like a lot of the processes were driven by people. But now, as the demand for data increases, like volumes of data increases, and a lot of this has been driven by our deep sector efforts as the context around the data gets more important. And we're kind of realizing like, hey, like, people are good, but I can't always go like talk to somebody to understand the data set. How can we get more of that information that exists in somebody's head out into the system in a way that both humans and machines can discover and interpret. So work in progress.
Yeah. Okay. Do you use the term data products for describing this? Is that something that you guys talk about?
I talk about data products probably more than people want to hear about data products. I think part of the issues that we have within FactSet is that it's hard to define data products, right? Especially in a business whose products are data, right? Because a lot of times people are like, oh, data product, and they're like, oh no, that's what we sell to our clients are the data products. And then I make the argument of like, well, any data that we publish for consumption, right? Like, whether it's internal or external, don't we want it all to be, have SLAs and be of quality and be understandable? So I definitely have a more liberal definition of data product. I'm just like, any data product that one group puts out for consumption by another, I think should be subject to this idea of data product. We're not there yet, but that's what I'm lobbying for.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess, it can be a product that's free and a product that's not free, and you kind of want those same properties of quality and ownership and contracts around what it's supposed to have and not have and things like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think obviously there's the data mesh book, and if you're listening and you haven't read the data mesh book, I would suggest go check it out. I think in the book when we're talking I'm probably gonna not get her name correct, so I apologize. Like Zhumak is talking about data products. A lot of times she's talking about like analytical data and how do we share and collaborate on analytical data within an organization. And I think this is probably one place where I expand. I kind of have evolved in my thinking to I don't know if I want to say evolved because that implies that it went in the correct direction. But where my thoughts have kind of changed from that is analytical data, yes, but What about governance? What about like ontological data, right? It's all data, right? And if you want to say like, hey, here's an ontology that the organization is going to follow when we're talking about public companies, when we're talking about cell towers, we're talking about power plants. Um, that's data too, right? And that data has a lifespan. It needs to, and it has, the same controls. Somebody needs to own that data. Somebody needs to curate that data, and put that out there. And so, when I'm thinking about a data products and a data product ecosystem, right? There's conceptually what it is. I don't think there's much disagreement with folks, conceptually what it is, but I think it's,
Mhm.
physically how do you implement a data product, and it comes down to like, when I think of a data product and its implementation, it's really the metadata,
Yeah.
right? What metadata can you put around the the resource that you're trying to share in the organization, whether it's a table in some sort of analytical data store, or it's an ontology, or it's governance rules.
Yeah.
To me, it's they're all data products.
Yeah. No, there's a whole other podcast we could do just talking about data
Yeah,
governance and how do you think about these ontologies, and maybe describing them in a graph format, and
for
go
sure.
on for hours about just about that. I do want to transition here in a second, to talk a little bit about AI, but I did before that want to ask you, when you have all these data products and now you're using Iceberg, what role does Dremio play in this architecture? Like, who's using it, and what
Yeah.
are they doing with it?
Yeah. So Dremio, and I think this is, I've had the opportunity to participate in the advisory board for Dremio, and so I think we use it the same way that a lot of the users of Dremio use it, which is we kind of use it as that gold, that gold layer delivery, right?
Mhm.
It's very performant, it's cost effective, and so. We kind of use it like we orchestrate our whole ecosystem. We kind of get the data ready, and then Dremio kind of sits as that last mile of delivery.
Yeah. Cool. And talking about AI a little bit now, Gen AI is on everybody's mind. And earlier, when you were talking about how some of the data that you're acquiring is unstructured data, some PDFs, for example, it just came to mind that there's probably so many opportunities now with Gen AI to make better use of that kind of data, or automatically turn it into structure, and just get more out of it. So could you talk a little bit about how you're using AI, or looking to use AI,
Yeah.
with your kind of architecture?
Carefully. When our clients count on FactSet to deliver, factually accurate information, right? And so the hallucination problem, within generative AI, is something we take very seriously. So whenever we're thinking about applying kind of this technology, we have this saying inside of like, oh, we'll prove it, right? Like if we're going to put it in, an answer in front of a client, we need to be able to prove it and say like, this is why you care about this. And I think what's really interesting is actually the tolerance for believing is lower, right? Like if somebody was using our workstation, and a number is kind of presented, if we surface that same number via an LM, via a chat experience, the level of skepticism is higher, and perhaps rightfully so. So it's very carefully, but because there is so much data in the ecosystem, and we can't always anticipate exactly how a client is going to want to look at this data and combine it and stitch it together. I think that's where I get really excited about LLMs, and because it allows you to be creative, and really the trick is, and it kind of gets back to data products, right? Like if you have like that strong data product ecosystem, and that data product ecosystem is surfacing the context around your data. I kind of heard a quote the other day. Well, when I think about the data product ecosystem, I kind of think of like a knowledge graph. And then, there's a quote the other day that I really liked, where it's like, LLMs are really good at being creative, but they're not great at always being right. And, knowledge graphs are garbage at being creative, but they're factual, right? And so kind of the blend of those two, I think, is where I get really excited of like, hey, how can I ask a question that really has at its fingertips the entire breadth of all of the content that FactSet has, and then can we bring that back in a bespoke way to answer specifically their question? I think that future is very possible, and I think it's just
Mhm.
really exciting.
So maybe using GraphRag, or something like that to
Yeah,
combine
yeah,
the two.
exactly. Yep.
Interesting. Okay, so I heard from you that if you want to serve incorrect information, do it through a chat bot and not through a like.
Don't. Hopefully, people are really. I hearken, hallucinations in an LLM is to recognizing spam, right? And in your email, and I think people have some intuitive understanding of like, oh, if this is coming out of a chat experience, I should be perhaps a little extra critical of what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in general, when we look at even within Dremio, how we use LLMs today for just every aspect of the business, really, in some areas they're kind of statistical anyway, right? If you're sending somebody, an email about Dremio and you get something wrong, it's not the end of the world, right? Chances are,
Yes.
you weren't going to have 100% hit rate on your emails in marketing anyway, right? And I
Yeah.
think the same thing is true for support, for example, right? Like
Yeah.
people make mistakes too. So as long as you can make fewer mistakes,
Yeah.
or just provide better service, then I think you're in good shape. But yeah,
Yeah.
obviously, if you're providing financial data and people are betting a lot of money on based on
On
that
the
data,
outcome. Yeah.
yeah, it's not a great thing to make mistakes in.
We do have other use cases of LLMs internally as well. Specifically in support, we get a lot of calls of like, "Hey, I'm looking for this. I need to get this data. How can I do it?" And so, we kind of have built workflows around that. We've kind of have our own custom formulas, and it basically helps surface an answer for to the agent. That's kind of we call them consultants, just the consultant that's trying to help that client out of like, well, here it is, right? I forget what percentage of the calls we get that are that, but it's very high. And so, the better kind of that experience gets for our agents, and we still have an agent in the middle because or a consultant in the middle because that is not always accurate. But I think it's getting up there, right?
Yeah,
And it's just a huge time saver for them.
sure, sure. And do all these Gen AI use cases do they fit well into this new architecture that you've built with kind of the lake house in the cloud, or are you finding that you have to make different changes or various changes to your architecture, or maybe how you manage the data?
Yeah, and you'll start to understand why I say people maybe get sick of me talking about data products. But if you think about kind of governance and cataloging and having context around your data ecosystem, kind of pre Lakehouse architecture, it's nice to know where all your data is and where all your data assets are, but like, what are you going to do with that information? Because if they're stored in all these different systems, they're not kind of like available to talk to each other. Like, you're going to have to do, there might be an insight that you have
Yeah.
of like, hey, maybe we should connect these two data sets together, but somebody's got to go physically do it.
Hmm.
I think what's really exciting kind of about like the lakehouse architecture and the ability for query engines like Dremio to actually federate across multiple data sources is now with that same context. If you know, hey, these data sets can be combined interestingly in that way, it's not a big effort. It's like, well, let's just go do it, right? Let's just go write the query, and perhaps you have to optimize it later. But yeah, I think when you're talking about presenting the data to the LLM in a way that it can understand, if it can kind of tell you the data at once, um, having it in a lakehouse is it just I don't have to worry about how am I going to get at it, how am I going to combine it. Like that's a solved problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I'm seeing some folks even use AI to help create and kind of manage these data products, right? Just
Yes, I
things
think
that
there's an
maybe a data
element. Yeah.
engineer would have to do manually. Now you're figuring it out. And the other day I was actually, this is a while ago, before we added this text to SQL feature in Dremio, over a year ago. I was playing around with Chat GPT, and I had this table of data, and I think it was like zip codes, and but the column name had this random name, and I just asked ChatGPT, what do you see in this column? And it was perfect. It was like, these are zip codes in the United States,
Yep.
and so that was kind of, wow, this is
No.
something
Yeah.
that
One
person
hundred
won't have to do.
percent. I mentioned earlier kind of like that logical layer that we've been building out and kind of some of the tooling there, and we've been adding more and more. Hey, this is what I want to do, and it'll kind of help you do that. And the same thing, right? If you're getting
Yeah,
if we have a new vendor that comes on board and they give you some sort of data dictionary, it's just like, hey, well, here's the CSV they gave me. Here's a data dictionary. Like, how much of this can you do for me? And I expect in the future the answer is going to be like a lot.
yeah, yeah, 100%. And I think folks are working on like AI data engineers and all sorts of
Yeah.
interesting things like that.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's transition now to kind of our final segment here, talking a little bit about kind of advice for for others, career advice. And so yeah, you've had a very successful career in this kind of world of data. And so when you think about your own kind of career and path, what are some of the key learnings that have shaped kind of your approach to data or to leadership, and maybe any mistakes you can share that you've learned from? That would be awesome.
Yeah, well, mistakes. Sometimes I think to myself, there's no lesson that I've learned that I didn't learn the hard way. So there's been plenty of those. Um, there's a few things here, right? So for me, I've been at FactSet for what many people would consider perhaps multiple careers. But within my time at FactSet, I've moved around a lot. There's not really an SBU that I haven't been in some incarnation at this point. And so I've moved around a lot within the organization. I've been an IC, I've managed teams, I've managed teams of teams. Now I'm an architect. I've been a data producer. I've been a data consumer. And so, I can, even with all of that history, I can see myself going back to any of those roles in the future. And so, when I approach a problem, I'm still wearing all of those hats to some degree, right? And I think it allows me to be more effective for it. And so, in terms of advice I would give, and this is, I guess, not just data related, but it's in general. Try to if you've been in a role for a little bit and you're comfortable there, maybe try getting out of your comfort zone a little bit and seeing what else is out there.
Cool. I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
So let's wrap this up with one final question. Maybe we have some folks that are listening to this that are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs, and they're thinking about what are some of the emerging trends in this space that are going to shape the future. What are some of the challenges that you're personally dealing with right now that maybe they could help solve?
Yeah, give you two guesses. I'll go with this, and the first one doesn't count.
Product.
Yeah, data product, exactly. I think that ecosystem is really exciting, and I think when the book was released, it was before LLMs. I mean, they were around, but it's before they made the splash that they did.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what year at this
You mean
point.
the data mesh book?
Yes, the data mesh book. Yeah, exactly. But LLMs have just, and the need for the context around the data, right? Like you need to be able to describe to the machine like what data it has at its fingertips, right? And I think that is something that is really exciting. You kind of mentioned this idea of graph rag of how do we take what is good about LLMs and play to that, but then also mitigate its the weaknesses of the hallucination problem and data freshness and everything else. So I kind of view data products and having a robust data product ecosystem where you can capture that context around the data is kind of being critical to being successful in that endeavor. So, I think cataloging can be quite challenging because it tends to be so unique to the organization that's trying to implement it. But if somebody can do it and can kind of do it through that lens of data product, I think that'd be, they could be very successful.
Cool. Well, Greg, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing all this knowledge.
Thank you for having me.